We all agreed. You're not welcome at the dad's birthday party. That's what my mom said to me, loud, clear, and with a smile that stung more than any slap. I was standing in the driveway, holding a photo album I'd spent weeks restoring for him, his favorite childhood memories, our last fishing trip, the concert ticket stub he gave me when I turned 13. And just like that, I was erased. Again, no seat at the table, no space in the family photos, no voice in the life I used to be part of. The worst part? They didn't even flinch. Not my stepmother, not my brother, not even my dad. Or so I thought. But that night, as I sat alone on the porch, something happened. Something that would unravel everything they tried to bury and remind them that truth doesn't need an invitation to show up. I'm Samantha. And for years, I stayed silent, hoping silence might buy me love. But this time, I'm not staying quiet. If you've ever been made to feel like a stranger in your own family, I hope my story helps you find your voice again. Let's begin. I had rehearsed this moment in my head a dozen times. The way I'd walk up to the front door, the way my dad would open it and his eyes would light up with that familiar, gentle pride. I'd even practiced what I would say, something about the frame I was bringing, the old picture of us at the Harmony Hill Music Festival when I was 10. It was the last photo of us before everything began to unravel, but none of that mattered. None of that played out. Because Janice opened the gate. She stood there like she had every right to be the keeper of that house. Her pearls sat tight around her neck, her blouse crisp, her lipstick a shade too sharp for sincerity. And yet, her smile was calm, cold. We all agreed, "You're not welcome at your dad's birthday party," she said, like she was telling me the weather. I stood there stunned. The sun was warm on my back, but my fingers had gone ice cold around the gift bag. Inside was the picture frame, mahogany, polished, with a gold plate engraved at the bottom, Samantha and Dad, forever in tune. My lips parted, but no sound came out. I glanced over her shoulder. Through the front windows, I could see balloons in navy and silver, a banner that read, "Happy 70th Walter," and the faint sound of laughter clinking through the glass. Connor and Drew, my half-brothers, were both there with their wives, dressed to the nines. People from the neighborhood, old co-workers, even some distant relatives I barely remembered, all gathered for his birthday, our dad's birthday, my dad's. My heart pounded, not because I wasn't invited, I could have lived with that, but because no one had told me. No text, no call, no explanation, just silence. And now this. Janice must have noticed where my eyes landed because she shifted slightly to block my view. "It's a family thing," she added, as if that clarified anything. I nodded slowly, then looked down at the gift bag in my hand. The picture frame suddenly felt heavy, like it held more than wood and glass. Like it carried every piano lesson, every hug, every Saturday morning pancake. My fingers tightened around the handles. "I see," I said quietly. There was nothing else to do. No scene to make. No sense in begging. So I turned, walked back down the steps, heels clicking on the stone, the sound echoing louder than my pulse, but halfway down I stopped. I reached into the bag, pulled out the frame, and turned back. Janice was already closing the door, satisfied. I didn't call out. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked up to the porch, placed the frame gently on the stone ledge by the door, and stepped back. Written across the bottom in my own handwriting, barely visible in gold ink, were the words, "It's not a gift. It's a memory." I didn't wait to see if anyone noticed. I didn't want to know if someone picked it up or if they'd toss it in the trash with the wrapping paper later that night. I walked back to my car, my jaw tight, the back of my eyes burning. As I reached for the keys, I saw movement in the window. Dad wasn't there, but something else was. On the entry table next to the guest book and centerpiece were 2 silver pocket watches displayed in a glass case. Identical ones. My father's prized heirloom. The one he always kept in his jacket pocket. The one he once said he'd leave to me. I blinked hard. The glass distorted the reflection, but I recognized the inscription. Time is music when played with heart. It wasn't just a party. It was a rewriting. They were erasing me. And as I sat in the driver's seat, my phone buzzed. One new message. Unknown number. It's done. No more loose ends. I froze. Behind me, Janice's voice floated faintly through the open window. Handled it, she said into her phone. No more trouble. The car door closed with a click that felt like punctuation. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there for a long minute and let the silence fill in the cracks where my family should have been. But that's the thing about silence. It can be louder than any lie. And sometimes, it's the start of a song no one's ready to hear. There are some silences so long and so heavy, they become part of your bones. Mine began the night I left that house. Not just last week at the party I wasn't invited to, but years ago, when I still believed love and sacrifice could protect a place in someone's heart. Dad's first stroke came like thunder out of nowhere. I was working in Chicago, teaching music therapy workshops, building something steady. I dropped everything in a heartbeat. I packed up, broke my lease, canceled my gigs. Because when your father can't speak or swallow or sit up on his own, you don't hesitate. You go. For 10 months, I was his hands and his voice. I bathed him, fed him spoon by spoon, read him jazz lyrics while he blinked once for yes and twice for no. I learned every prescription name, every physical therapy stretch, every subtle shift in his breathing. I held his hand through night terrors and whispered lullabies like he used to hum when I was small. I kept believing the man who raised me was still in there, even when all he could do was blink and cry. And he did get better. Not fully, but enough. He started to sit up without help. He smiled again, crooked, but still my dad's smile. I remember the first time he managed to say my name, Sam. Raspy and barely audible, and how I collapsed into his shoulder sobbing because I knew he was coming back to me. But Janice didn't like that. At first, she played along. She was polite, distant, brought flowers into his room, fluffed his pillows, asked the nurses questions. But she never touched him when he cried. She never sang. And she certainly never cleaned him when things got messy. That was left to me. Until the professionals came. One day, out of nowhere, a nurse named Linda showed up. Young, bright, and gentle. She had a warmth that reminded me of the home we used to have, and she noticed things. She saw the way Dad's eyes followed me, the way he calmed when I entered the room, how he mouthed, "Stay," when he thought no one saw. Linda and I grew close, not just co-workers. We became allies. That didn't last. A month after Linda started, Janice pulled me aside. Her tone was clipped, controlled. She said Dad's doctors were concerned about his mental state, that I was, quote, contributing to emotional instability and creating dependency. I laughed, out loud, until I saw she wasn't joking. She handed me a typed notice. "We're making changes to your father's care plan," it read. "Effective immediately, we ask that you relocate to reduce external stressors." I asked if I could speak to him one last time. She said no. "His blood pressure spikes every time you come near," she added coolly. "This is for his health." I left that day with a duffel bag and no goodbye. Weeks passed, then months. I tried calling, texting, even sent letters. Nothing came back. Linda called me once from a blocked number, whispering that she'd been fired. "They said I got too close," she said, her voice shaking. But he still asks for you. That was the last time I heard from anyone inside that house. I kept tabs on him through secondhand rumors, an aunt mentioning he seemed quieter, a cousin saying he wasn't at Thanksgiving, someone's Facebook photo where he looked thinner, dimmer. Then last year, I tried to renew access to a joint bank account I used to manage for his therapy payments. The bank said I was no longer authorized. Power of attorney had been transferred. Janice. No notice. No signature from Dad that I ever saw. Just silence, wrapped in legal ink. She took everything. The accounts, the property titles, even the retirement portfolio I'd been helping to track. My name vanished from all of it like I'd never been there, like I'd never spoon-fed the man through tremors or held his hand in hospital nights. She erased me and replaced me with paperwork. But the thing about silence is, it doesn't mean absence. It means waiting and watching and planning for the moment when someone finally dares to speak. I hadn't planned to be at the pharmacy that day. I only stopped in because my stomach had been a knotted mess since the party, or non-party, I should say. I barely slept, barely ate. My mind had been spinning with old memories and fresh wounds, with questions that had no clean answers. So, I walked in, browsed the vitamins, pretended I was normal. That's when I saw her. Linda. She was by the first aid aisle holding a small bottle of antiseptic, her hands trembling so hard she almost dropped it. Her eyes widened when they met mine, and for a second I thought she might run. Instead, she looked around, then walked straight to me and whispered, "We can't talk here." We stepped outside, to the side of the building where the security cameras didn't reach. She clutched her bag like it contained something nuclear, and in a way, it did. "I never stopped watching," she said. "I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't do anything after they fired me. Until I heard this." From her coat pocket, she pulled out a small USB recorder. Her fingers were pale, knuckles white as she handed it to me. "I recorded it by accident. I was just trying to check on Mr. Walter, and they didn't know I was there. I didn't ask what was on it. I didn't want to know, until I got home and hit play." The audio started crackly, like it had been recorded from a distance. Then Janice's voice came through, unmistakably smug. "She never asks about you, Walter. I told you. Samantha moved on. Some people don't know how to let go." I heard my father's voice next. It was faint, like someone speaking through a cracked door. She doesn't call?" There was a pause, the kind that hurts more than words. Then Janice's answer, clipped and clinical. "She's busy. No one has time for old people these days." I stopped breathing. He asked again, softer, almost like he didn't want to believe her. "Not even a card?" Janice sighed dramatically. "Walter, I'm the one who takes care of you now. Isn't that what matters?" My fingers trembled. I sat on the floor, the recorder still playing, the world spinning. That voice, his voice, still remembered me, still asked for me. And all this time, I thought he'd turned away. I thought he believed I abandoned him. But the truth was, someone fed him that lie. This wasn't just silence anymore. It was sabotage. A carefully orchestrated campaign to erase me, not just from Dad's life, but from his mind, from his heart. I fast-forwarded, needing it to be over. But then I heard Janice again, and this time she wasn't speaking to Dad. She was on the phone. "Yes, of course I'm interested," she said. "I think the story could be very inspiring, how I stepped up when no one else did. A woman who put love before blood." I froze. "Feel free to use the old family photos," she continued. "The girl, Samantha, she's not involved anymore. You don't need to mention her. This is about a mother's devotion, not some estranged daughter who disappeared." Devotion? Mother? I felt bile rise in my throat. This wasn't just manipulation. It was full-blown revisionist history. She was trying to rewrite the narrative before anyone could challenge it. Before Dad forgot what really happened. Before the world swallowed her version whole. When I looked up, my eyes caught the reflection in the window. Me, small and exhausted, but still here, still standing. I walked over to my desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out my own recorder. It had been gathering dust since the hospital days, back when I used to record Dad's speech progress. Back when I believed my voice mattered. I wiped it clean. Then I pressed record. "My name is Samantha Lane," I said, "and I'm not going to be silent anymore." Because silence had cost me too much already. And now it was my turn to speak. The invitation never came, but I wasn't waiting for it anymore. I knew what I was walking into. I knew Janice would be there in one of her pastel dresses, smiling for the cameras like she'd raised this family with her own hands. I knew Connor and Drew would pretend I never existed, and the distant cousins would whisper, "Isn't that Samantha?" Like I was some ghost wandering back from exile. But this time, I wasn't here to be seen. I was here to be remembered. I wore the pale blue shirt Dad had bought me when I turned 17, the one he insisted made me look confident and kind. I hadn't worn it in years, but it still fit, like it had been waiting for this moment. In my pocket was a small USB drive, no label, just a black sliver of truth. The venue was decorated like a page from a magazine. Gold balloons, a buffet that stretched across half the hall, a jazz trio playing softly in the corner. It was all so perfectly staged. No one noticed me at first, just another guest slipping in as the slideshow started. Images of Dad over the years flashed on a screen. Young, proud, surrounded by his sons, with Janice never far from the frame. Then, the screen flickered. There was no fanfare, no announcement. Just a quiet cut to black, and then my voice, low and steady. "Take a deep breath, Dad. You're doing great. Left foot, right foot. Good." The video played, me holding his arm in our living room, guiding him step by shaky step as he learned to walk again. Another clip, me at the kitchen table, coaxing him through a sentence. Then one more, both of us on the porch, singing out of tune to an old Johnny Cash song, his voice raspy but full of joy. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few people turned toward Janice. She froze, lips tight. And then the audio rolled in. The recording Linda had given me, clear and undeniable. Janice's voice, calm and calculated. "She never asks about you, Walter. She's moved on." My father's response followed, frail but unmistakably his. She doesn't call?" And Janice, without hesitation, "She's busy. No one has time for old people anymore." The room fell into a silence so thick it felt like gravity shifted. I scanned the faces, some shocked, some ashamed. A few avoided my eyes altogether, but then I looked at him. Dad sat still in his chair at the center table, dressed in his favorite gray sweater. He didn't speak at first. His mouth trembled. Then, slowly, tears rolled down his cheeks. He lifted his head, looked straight at me, and said 5 words that cracked the floor beneath my anger. "She never left me." That was it. I didn't need applause. I didn't need apologies. I didn't come for them. I stepped forward, bowed my head slightly, and turned to leave. No grand speech, no final accusation. Just truth, unvarnished and finally heard. Before I walked out, I passed to the gift table. Among the wrapped boxes and shiny bags, I left a single white envelope. Inside was a simple card, handwritten in blue ink. "Love doesn't need an invite." And with that, I disappeared into the night, no longer invisible, but finally undeniable. After the party, I didn't go out. I didn't cry. I didn't even change clothes. I just walked into my apartment, closed the door behind me, and stared at the small keyboard in the corner. My cheap, old electric piano, the kind you could buy at a garage sale for $20 if you haggled hard enough. But to me, it had never just been an instrument. It had been a bridge. When I was 7, Dad taught me how to play on a real upright piano, one that stood against our living room wall like a guardian. Its keys were chipped, and the black notes had gone dull from use, but when my fingers moved across them under his guidance, the world made sense. On days when I didn't feel seen, he'd sit beside me, point to middle C, and say, "Play your truth, sweetheart. Music doesn't lie." It was the one place where silence didn't mean absence. That night, I sat on my worn-out couch, pulled the keyboard onto my lap, and played. I didn't warm up. My fingers trembled. I messed up the first bar, but I played anyway. It wasn't just muscle memory, it was emotional muscle. The song he taught me, the first I ever learned. Simple, gentle, true. It filled the room, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice humming along. Halfway through, my vision blurred, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of everything. Of having been pushed out, replaced, silenced. Of watching people I used to call family pretend I never existed. Of realizing that the person I'd loved most had been fed lies in my name. But that melody reminded me, I still had my truth. I closed the keyboard, wiped my eyes, and picked up my phone. It was blowing up. Notifications everywhere, texts, missed calls, alerts from social media apps I barely used. One video had gone viral, apparently recorded by a guest at the party. It showed me standing in front of the slideshow, not speaking, just standing, as the audio of Dad's voice played in the background. The caption read, "The real daughter spoke in silence." Thousands of shares, comments from strangers, some angry at Janice, others moved by Dad's words. A few even posted their own stories of being erased, of being misunderstood, of being the outsider in their own families. It was overwhelming and strangely comforting. And then, one message stood out from the rest. It was from someone I didn't know. The profile picture was blank. No mutual friends. The message was short. Just one sentence. "I used to work at the care home where your father stayed. There's something you need to know." My breath caught. I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over. The keyboard still hummed slightly from the last note I played, like the echo of a question left hanging. Maybe it wasn't over. Maybe the story they wrote for me wasn't the one I had to live. I placed the phone down gently. Then, with both hands resting on my lap, I whispered the words Dad once told me, like a prayer I'd finally remembered how to say, "Music doesn't lie." The knock on my door came at 7:42 a.m., sharp, cold, and too firm to be anything casual. 2 officers stood outside when I opened it, hands resting just close enough to their belts to remind me this wasn't a friendly visit. "Miss Samantha Reeves?" one of them asked. I nodded, still barefoot and in a faded t-shirt from college. "We need you to come down to the station. There's been a report filed against you for elder abuse and suspected financial misconduct involving your father, Walter Reeves." For a few seconds, I couldn't even process what they were saying. Elder abuse? Financial misconduct? My hands started to tremble as I reached for my hoodie and shoes. The walk down the hallway felt longer than usual, like my apartment building had stretched overnight. At the station, they were surprisingly polite, but clinical. I sat in a windowless room with a chipped desk and flickering overhead lights, trying to answer questions that made no sense. "When was the last time you accessed your father's bank accounts?" "Never. I didn't even know the login." "Have you ever transferred assets in his name?" "Number. Were you aware that several of your father's previous accounts listed you as an agent?" I was. Years ago. Before the stroke. But then Janice had taken over everything. The officers remained expressionless, flipping through pages of typed-up allegations, dotted with vague phrases like exhibited controlling behavior, restricted familial access, and benefited financially without consent. The source of the report was listed as an anonymous family member. Of course, and as if that wasn't enough, my phone buzzed with an alert the second I left the station. My bank accounts had been frozen pending IRS review for suspected fraud. Just like that, my world had tilted. Rent, groceries, even my prepaid phone bill, all in limbo. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles whitened. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes hollowed by fatigue and disbelief. It wasn't just a smear campaign anymore. It was war. Then I remembered the message, the one that came after the party, the former care worker. I found it buried in my inbox, and without second-guessing, I called the number. "Mia speaking?" came a soft voice on the other end. I explained who I was, bracing for hesitation, but she didn't hesitate. "I've been waiting for your call." We met that evening in a quiet coffee shop just outside town, where no one knew either of us. Mia was in her late 30s, quiet but sharp-eyed, the kind of person who observed more than she said. She sipped her tea slowly, then leaned in. "I was fired long before Linda. Janice said I was interfering too much. What I was actually doing was trying to protect your father." I stayed quiet. She continued. "I saw Janice bring him paperwork when he was sedated. He'd be groggy, slurring his words, barely able to hold a pen. But she insisted he sign. I flagged it once, and 2 days later, I was out." My stomach turned. "Did you ever see what he signed?" Mia nodded. "Once. It was a power of attorney document. She said it was for medical permission, but it was financial. I got scared, so I made a copy." From her purse, she pulled out a manila envelope, creased and worn from being hidden too long. Inside was a photocopy of one of those forms. My father's signature was shaky, barely legible, and wrong. I'd seen his handwriting my entire life. This wasn't it. Mia added, "I've kept it in case anyone ever came forward." "You're not crazy, Samantha. She's been rewriting everything. Your absence? Engineered? Your silence? Manufactured?" I thanked her, hands trembling again, but this time not from fear. It was something else. Resolve. By the time I got home, it was past midnight. The air was still. I sat on the edge of my bed and opened my laptop. I had a new file to start. A timeline, a list of names, a web of lies with Janice at the center. And now, I had evidence. A crack in her perfect narrative. She wanted me erased, but I was still here. And shadows, as I was learning, only exist when there's light. I hadn't spoken to Garrett Nichols since college, but when I called, he picked up on the second ring like he'd been waiting for me. "Still fighting ghosts, Sam?" he asked, his voice a mix of humor and fatigue. I laughed dryly. "Number this time, I'm fighting something far more real." Garrett was now a lawyer specializing in elder rights and estate fraud, a niche I never thought I'd need. But as I laid out what Janice had done and what I could prove, he didn't hesitate. "You have more than most people start with. Let's build a case." We met at a downtown office where the air smelled like printer ink and legal anxiety. Garrett scribbled timelines on a whiteboard as I spread out everything: copies of documents, the audio file from Linda, Mia's testimony, and the printout of my frozen bank status. But the piece that stopped him mid-sentence was something I found buried in a years-old email thread. It was a draft, never sent, a scanned letter written by my father. Just a few lines, but they hit me harder than any court ruling could. "Samantha, you are the light after every storm, the silence after my trembling hands stop. You are the reason I wait for morning. Love, Dad. Garrett looked up slowly. This is gold, he said, almost reverently. Handwritten, time-stamped, clearly never manipulated. It shows intent, and it shows affection. Together with Linda and Mia, we started rebuilding a timeline, marking every moment Janice had nudged the narrative in her favor. The dates she forced my father to sign paperwork, the caregivers she fired without reason, the public stories she peddled while quietly isolating him. We color-coded it like a war map, blue for Walter's declining health, red for Janice's interventions, yellow for witnesses, green for legal documents. Patterns emerged and so did gaps, places where memory blurred and facts dissolved into fog. But even fog has shape if you know where to look. It wasn't just about what Janice had done, it was about what she had rewritten. And we were beginning to draw the original lines back. Then the message came. It was short, from a number I didn't recognize. This is Rebecca. We need to talk. I'm Connor's wife. I froze. Rebecca had always been polite but distant, never warm, never cruel. She stayed in the safe zone, where neutrality passed for kindness. We met at a quiet park that afternoon, the air cool, a breeze bending the leaves just enough to feel dramatic. I'm not here to take sides, she started, but I'm raising a son. And I can't let him grow up in a family that only knows how to edit the truth to fit comfort. She handed me a manila envelope. Inside were old family photos, some I hadn't seen in years. One of them was of me and Dad on the porch, his arm around me, both of us laughing. On the back, in his handwriting, it said, Summer 2003, Sammy's joke about the squirrels. Rebecca looked at me. Janice tried to burn them. I pulled these out. She stood, brushed the leaves from her coat, and added, Connor doesn't know I'm here. I'm not here for him. I'm here because this is what right looks like. Do what you have to do. Back home, I turned off every light and let the apartment go dark. I opened the old photo album, flipping through page after page of memories that had somehow become weapons. My laptop glowed faintly on the desk beside me. I clicked into a new document. Title: To the Truth. Chapter 1. I didn't know how many chapters it would take, but I was done letting others write the story. The mic in front of me looked harmless, just a piece of metal and foam balanced on a stand. But the moment my friend Rachel hit record, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to speak, and finally hear the echo. Whenever you're ready, she said, her voice low, respectful. This was her podcast, Hidden Truths in Family Affairs. A small, loyal audience, but one built on the promise that real stories would be told, unfiltered. I cleared my throat. My father had a stroke 2 years ago, I began. At the time, we weren't close, but when I got the call, I dropped everything and showed up. I described the rehab sessions, the quiet mornings coaxing words from his mouth, the late nights learning how to hold his trembling hand without making him feel weak. I talked about the music, how I'd brought my small keyboard to the hospital and played old melodies until he could hum again. That's when I thought we were healing. I thought we were rewriting something that had been lost. Then I told the rest. How I was suddenly pushed out. How decisions were made behind closed doors. How I was labeled unstable, dramatic, even dangerous. How I discovered my father's name on documents I knew he couldn't have fully understood at the time. And how my bank account had been frozen, my reputation quietly dismantled, with accusations that never saw daylight, but burned all the same. Rachel sat silent across from me, letting the story breathe. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a flash drive. I brought a few things, I said, inserting it into her laptop. We played the audio, Janice's voice, calm and calculated, gently coercing my father to sign something. It's just for tax purposes, Walter. Don't worry about reading it. His voice followed, hesitant, slurred, confused. But I don't remember this. The clip ended. I followed it with the unsent letter, my father's handwriting, his words, proof of love buried under silence. I read it out loud. I let my voice crack. By the time the recording ended, neither of us spoke. Rachel squeezed my hand and whispered, "They're going to hear this." And they did. Within 24 hours, the episode had climbed to the top of the local podcast charts. Comments poured in, some from strangers, some from listeners who had lived through similar betrayals. "This broke me," one person wrote. "Thank you for putting words to what I never could." Another, "This isn't just her story, it's ours." Janice, I later learned, had just submitted a feel-good op-ed to a regional magazine, The Gift of Step-Parenthood, A Journey of Unconditional Love. The editor quietly pulled it before print. Apparently, the timing didn't feel quite right anymore, but the most unexpected moment came the next morning. My phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. The screen blinked to life. It was a video call, and there he was. My father. Thinner than I remembered, eyes sunken but aware. Behind him, a nurse hovered respectfully, adjusting the light. We stared at each other for what felt like an hour in a single breath. Finally, he spoke. "I remember the music," he said. "I remember you." Then the screen went black. That's all it was. 5 words. But they were everything. He called me in the early evening. Just his name lighting up my screen made my heart pause for a second. I hadn't saved his number. It was some quiet act of self-protection, but I still remembered it. "Can you come by the house?" he asked, his voice gravelly but calm. "There's something I need to give you." The old reading room hadn't changed. Dusty wood shelves, yellow light, the faint smell of pipe tobacco and lemon furniture polish. I stood there for a moment before he gestured for me to sit across from him at the small writing desk. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. "I wrote this 2 years ago," he said. "Didn't have the courage to send it. Or maybe I let myself believe the lie that you were better off away from me." I took the envelope, fingers trembling, and opened it. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakably his. He began by saying he was sorry for being silent, for letting others repaint his memories in colors that weren't his. He wrote about moments he still remembered, like the time I played piano for him at the hospital when no one else believed he could smile again. He confessed to being told I didn't need him anymore, that I had moved on, that he'd only hurt me by staying involved. "I wanted to believe that," he wrote. "It was easier than facing how much I needed you." My tears fell before I even reached the end. I looked at him, old but watching me with eyes no longer clouded by anyone else's story. I whispered, "I never left, Dad. They just pulled you away from me." He didn't speak. He just leaned forward and held me. For the first time in years, I let myself be held like a daughter. Then, quietly, he took something else from his jacket pocket. A silver pocket watch. The matching one to the piece I'd seen at the birthday party. The one Janice had shown off like a trophy. "It was never meant for display," he said. "It was always meant to be carried." I closed my fingers around it like it was a lighthouse in my palm. Later that night, I met with my lawyer. I didn't want a public lawsuit, no media, no spectacle. But I also couldn't leave what happened unanswered. We filed a civil claim, quietly, against Janice for financial exploitation and falsifying legal documents concerning an incapacitated person. No press release. Just paper, facts, signatures. The truth didn't need applause, it just needed to be placed in the right hands. Weeks later, I heard Janice had been summoned for questioning, not arrested, not yet. She had one more move left. but so did I. And mine wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring what was almost erased. A year passed. I moved to a city 3 states away. Nothing grand, just quieter. I opened a small legal aid center focused on elder protection cases. Most of my clients couldn't even afford coffee, but they had something worth more: stories that deserved to be protected, dignity that had been dismissed. I saw my father's face in every one of them. One morning, a padded envelope arrived with the return address of my father's care facility. Inside was a photograph. He was sitting beside the old upright piano in the recreation room, posture slightly hunched but proud. His hand rested on his lap, and in it, the silver pocket watch I'd given back to him during one of our last visits. On the back of the photo, in unsteady cursive, he had written, "Still here, still proud, still yours." I framed the photo and placed it on my desk, beside my court documents and case files. A quiet kind of legacy. I never returned to the house I grew up in, never stepped into that dining room again. But every year on his birthday, I mailed a simple card to the care home. Just one line. "I'm still playing, Dad." Some things didn't need to be said out loud. Some songs didn't need lyrics to be understood. Eventually, the consequences reached them. Janice was formally removed from all fiduciary roles due to conflict of interest and pending investigation into financial misconduct. Connor and Drew, for their part in enabling the scheme, were ordered to repay portions of misappropriated funds. But I didn't chase headlines. I didn't take the estate. I let the courts handle what they were built for. I wasn't there for a victory lap. I was there to protect memory, protect the truth, and protect myself. My life didn't need their invitations anymore, because some doors, once closed, are better left that way. And the ones that matter, they stay open in the heart, not in a hallway. They never invited me back. But the truth never needed an invitation. Sometimes the loudest form of love is silence, and the strongest form of healing is choosing peace over proving a point. When we stop seeking validation from those who never truly saw us, we start building a life that reflects who we are, not who they needed us to be. Thank you for listening. If this story touched something in you, feel free to share your thoughts, subscribe, and follow along for more. Your voice matters here.